Imagine you're standing out in a cotton field in the American Deep South. It's the 1950s. The air is incredibly thick, humid, and the whole economy stretching out around you is, well, almost entirely based on agriculture.
Right, a social order that looks completely unchanged from the century before.
Exactly. But then you look up from the dirt, and the men in the building right next to that field are literally speaking German to each other.
Which is just a staggering contrast.
It is. And they are designing the mechanical blueprints for the actual rocket that will take the first human being to the moon. Today, we are completely tearing up the map of what you think you know about the American South.
It's a profound cognitive dissonance, honestly. I mean, we like things to be simple, we want them to fit neatly into these cultural boxes we build from afar. But when you examine the actual mechanics of history, those simple boxes just disintegrate.
And breaking down those boxes is exactly why we're here. Welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Saturday, March 21st, 2026, and we are once again looking through the topic lens.
And our mission here is always to look past the exhausting daily news cycle.
Right. Like, we are going to let the war in the Middle East rest for today. Instead, we're zooming out to look at the big picture, the broader relations between the U.S. and Europe. We want to step entirely out of our own bubbles and understand the deep-seated cultures, the politics, the environments that truly motivate people.
Because everyone you meet is shaped by the bubble they grew up in. Getting to peek inside that bubble is how you actually understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. So yesterday, we took our American listeners on a trip to Europe. We explored Albania. We talked about the double-headed eagle as a unifying symbol. And we unpacked the fact that there are actually more Albanians living in the U.S. than in Albania itself.
Which is still an incredible statistic to wrap your head around.
Who would have thought? Right. But today, we are pivoting. We are crossing the Atlantic and landing in an American state with a remarkably similar name, Alabama.
A massive state in the American South.
Yes, and for the next hour, we want our European listeners to get to know this state deeply. We're going to view this specific American territory strictly through a European lens. Because, let's be honest, Americans often view Europe as one giant homogeneous block.
Oh, absolutely. And Europeans are often guilty of doing the exact same thing to the United States.
Right. So today our mission is to shatter that monolithic stereotype of the Deep South. We're talking European influence, the St. Andrew's Cross, complex politics, fierce sports rivalries, and some of the most famous people in the world.
We are going to unpack a deeply layered reality today. And I do want to establish right up front that as we navigate this, especially when we get into the state's very heavy political and racial history, we are maintaining a strictly impartial analytical approach.
100%. We are just looking at what the sources tell us, for better or worse.
Right. We're here to report on the historical mechanics provided by the sources, not to endorse any specific viewpoints. We just want to examine the forces that shaped this land.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the contrasts we're about to explore are genuinely mind-bending. I mean, a state famous for cotton that built lunar rockets.
It's a massive shift in a very short time.
And a place with a deeply British Protestant interior, but this distinctly French and Catholic coastline. Plus, a sports rivalry that honestly makes the fiercest European football derbies look like a friendly neighborhood kickabout.
It is a state of profound duality. But to even begin to understand it, we have to grasp the sheer physical scale, because scale dictates logistics, and logistics dictate culture.
That makes total sense. So how big are we talking?
Alabama covers roughly 52,420 square miles. That's about 135,767 square kilometers. So to put that firmly into a European context for you, it is slightly larger than the entire landmass of England.
Wait, just pause on that for a second. A single American state? Just 1 out of 50 is larger than all of England.
Precisely. But here is the critical variable. It only has a population of about 5.19 million people.
Oh, wow. So it's massive but practically empty compared to England.
Exactly. While it has the landmass of England, its population is actually much closer to that of Norway or Denmark. And that tells you something fundamental about the psychology of the place.
It's because they just have so much space.
Right. It is not a densely packed, tiny province where people are living right on top of each other. It is a massive territory characterized by these vast, open, rural stretches. Now, in the context of the U.S., it ranks 24th in population and around 30th in total area, so it sits right in the middle of the American pack.
Okay, so you have this massive canvas, but it isn't just one type of landscape, is it? I mean, when you watch Hollywood movies, you tend to think of the South as just endless, flat farmland.
That is a huge misconception. Our sources actually break Alabama down into three incredibly distinct geographical zones. Essentially, the three Alabamas.
And this is where we see that absolute truth, right? That geography is destiny.
Yes. The physical landscape directly dictated the economic history, which dictated who settled where, which ultimately created these deep cultural divides within a single state.
So where do we start? Let's start in the north, up in the Tennessee Valley. This area reaches up into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And historically, it was settled largely by the Scotch-Irish and British who migrated down that Appalachian corridor.
I want to push back on that a bit, or at least dig a little deeper, because when we say Scotch-Irish, we were really talking about Ulster Scots, right?
Yes, exactly.
People who were largely fleeing religious persecution and, well, aristocratic privilege in Europe. They migrated down those mountains seeking cheap land and freedom from central authority.
They absolutely did, and they brought a fierce individualism with them. They brought a deep skepticism of central government, a strong tradition of oral storytelling, and the musical roots that would eventually evolve into American country music.
Which is fascinating. So traits that people globally recognize today as generically Southern American-like, the fierce independence or the country music, actually have their roots in 17th century Europe. They do. But the history of that northern region has a really interesting contradiction. Because as fiercely anti-government as they were, their entire mid-century economic revival was driven by a massive federal government project.
Wait, you mean the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA?
Exactly. During the Great Depression, this mountainous region was suffering from profound grinding poverty. The soil was eroding, there was no electricity, and subsistence farming was failing.
So how did these fiercely independent people justify taking federal help?
It was the brilliance of economic desperation overriding ideological preference. The federal government stepped in and built massive dams to tame the wild rivers, but it required flooding ancestral valleys and literally forcing these fiercely independent people off their land.
Oh, they must have absolutely hated that.
They did initially, but the dams brought cheap, abundant hydroelectric power. It literally brought light to the darkness. And the sudden introduction of electricity transformed a 1930s subsistence economy into an industrial powerhouse almost overnight.
That is wild. But then you move down from those mountains to the center of the state, and it is a completely different world.
A totally different world. This is the Black Belt.
And for our listeners, it is so crucial to clarify that the name Black Belt originally had absolutely nothing to do with race. It referred strictly to the geology, right?
Yes, it refers to this incredibly dark, rich, fertile soil. The mechanics of that geology are fascinating. The dark soil is actually the remnant of a prehistoric ocean shoreline that left behind rich Cretaceous chalk deposits.
So millions of years of decay created this perfect farming earth.
Exactly. And that specific geological reality dictated the economy of the 19th century. It made central Alabama an ideal environment for a massive cotton plantation economy.
And that agricultural wealth was built entirely and brutally on the institution of slavery.
It was. So the ancient geology dictated the agriculture dictated the demand for enslaved labor, and that brutal history laid the foundation for the demographic and political fault lines that still define the region right now.
Because today, the Black Belt is where the black population is highest and where poverty remains some of the most entrenched in the nation.
Right. The physical soil literally drew the demographic and political map of the state.
Which is just a heavy thing to process. But then, if you keep driving south, leaving those cotton fields behind, the landscape shifts entirely again. You hit the Gulf Coast, down around the city of Mobile.
And suddenly, you are in a subtropical maritime environment. Culturally, it feels like you've crossed an international border.
Because you kind of have, historically speaking.
Yes. Mobile is Alabama's maritime window to the world. It was actually founded by the French in 1702 as part of the French colony of Louisiana. They built Fort Louis de la Mobile as a strategic bridgehead.
And then later it was controlled by the Spanish, right?
Exactly. So down on the coast, you have this deep French and Spanish colonial legacy. You see it in the ironwork architecture, you taste it in the Creole seafood, and you experience it in their traditions. Mobile actually claims to have the oldest Mardi Gras celebration in North America, predating New Orleans.
Which is a rivalry they take incredibly seriously. But just think about what this means for you as an observer. Inside this one single state, you have a port city founded by the French that feels entirely foreign to a Protestant mountain town just a few hours north.
It's a massive internal culture clash.
Right. If you live in a country like Italy or the UK, you know exactly what this feels like. You have these stark divides between Milan and Naples or London and the north of England. Alabama has that exact same intense internal regionalism.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, whenever you have that kind of deep internal division, mountains versus plantations versus French ports, you need overarching symbols to tie the geopolitical entity together.
Which brings us to the flag of Alabama.
Yes. The flag is a masterclass in how a simple graphic can carry an immense, almost suffocating historical weight.
It really is. It was adopted on February 16, 1895. And visually, it's one of the simplest flags in the United States. It's just a stark crimson St. Andrew's cross of saltire on a pure white field.
And immediately, if you are looking at this from Europe, you are going to recognize that geometric shape. It's the exact same cross that dominates the flag of Scotland, and it's a foundational component of the British Union Jack.
Officially, the state law just describes it as a crimson cross of St. Andrew.
Right.
And given the heavy Scotch-Irish heritage of the state's early settlers in the north that we just talked about, it's very easy to just accept that action and move on.
But what's fascinating here is the mechanics of the symbolism and the timing of its adoption. It was adopted in 1895.
So roughly 30 years after the end of the American Civil War.
Exactly. This was the dawn of the Jim Crow era, a period when southern states were actively, legally dismantling the voting and civil rights granted to Black Americans after the war and institutionalizing strict racial segregation.
And it just so happens that a crimson St. Andrew's cross is also the exact geometric foundation of the Confederate battle flag.
Right. Historians and archivists, including Alabama's own state archives, note that the design was intended to embody the principal feature of the Confederate battle flag. It wasn't just a quaint nod to Scottish ancestry.
It was a very deliberate choice.
It was adopted during an era when Southern states were specifically choosing symbols to signal resistance to federal authority and to reestablish a rigid racial order. It functioned as a visual dog whistle.
Now, again, we're looking at this purely through the lens of historical analysis, but for you to really understand the South, it's vital to recognize that Southern symbols are rarely just neutral geographic markers. They are deeply coded.
It's a perfect reflection of the state itself. Clean and simple on the surface, incredibly complex and heavy underneath.
And speaking of that weight, let's look at where the power actually sits in Alabama. Let's talk about the cities. Because in Europe, the biggest city is almost always the capital, right? London, Paris, Rome, Berlin. They are the centers of gravity.
But in Alabama, the biggest city and the capital are entirely different places with entirely different evolutionary paths.
Which is actually a very common American pattern.
It is, and it's designed to decentralize power. So Montgomery is the state capital, situated in the central part of the state, right in that black belt we discussed earlier. It has about 200,000 residents in the city proper.
And it became the capital in 1846 purely because of logistics, right? It was a strategic river town at the absolute heart of the booming cotton economy.
Exactly. But Montgomery's true weight isn't its population size. It is its staggering historical dual legacy.
Put yourself on the physical streets of Montgomery for a minute. Just imagine walking down Dexter Avenue, because the geographic proximity of history here will give you whiplash.
It is unparalleled. In February 1861, Montgomery became the first capital of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as the president of the seceding Southern states right on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol building.
And the telegraph orders to fire on Fort Sumter, the military action which officially started the Civil War, were sent from a building just down the street. It was the absolute birthplace of the political project to preserve slavery.
But then, jump forward roughly 100 years.
Yes, jump to 1955. A black seamstress named Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on a Montgomery City bus to a white passenger.
And her arrest triggers the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasts for 381 grueling days.
And it is organized and led by a young local pastor who preaches at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And that church sits literally a stone's throw from the Capitol steps where Jefferson Davis was inaugurated.
And that pastor was Martin Luther King Jr. That boycott effectively launches the modern American civil rights movement.
So Montgomery is the cradle of the Confederacy and the birthplace of the civil rights movement. You can literally stand at a single spot, look one way and see where the Confederate government was formed, turn your head and see where Martin Luther King Jr. preached equality.
It's a city forced to carry the absolute extremes of the American moral experience.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, while Montgomery holds that heavy political and historical power, the economic engine historically sat further north in Birmingham.
Birmingham is fascinating because Unlike Montgomery or Mobile, it didn't even exist before the Civil War. It was founded in 1871.
A completely post-war invention. So why even put a city there?
Because of an incredibly rare geological anomaly in what is called Jones Valley. Right in that specific spot, you had all three essential raw materials needed to make steel.
Iron ore, coal, and limestone.
Exactly. Iron ore on one ridge, coal on another, and limestone in the middle. They were all located within a remarkably short distance of each other. You essentially just had to mine them and push them down the hill into the furnaces.
That's incredible luck. So the city exploded in growth, earning the nickname the Magic City, and became the Pittsburgh of the South.
It was a gritty, industrial, working-class city.
But we need to connect the dots here, because Birmingham had this sudden, massive influx of working-class people competing for grueling industrial jobs. The racial tensions were pressurized in a way they weren't in the slower rural farm towns.
Right. That economic pressure cooker is exactly why Birmingham became ground zero for the violent civil rights clashes of the 1960s.
When people in Europe picture the televised violence of the movement, they're usually picturing Birmingham.
Yes. In 1963, under the orders of the local commissioner of public safety, a man named Bull Connor, police used attack dogs and high-pressure fire hoses against peaceful civil rights demonstrators, many of whom were children.
Those images shock the globe.
They put immense international diplomatic pressure on the U.S. government, which ultimately helped force the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
So Birmingham has this incredibly heavy industrial and racial history. But how did it survive the collapse of American heavy industry? I mean, when the steel mills shut down, didn't it face the same crisis as the Rust Belt up north?
It did. It faced massive unemployment and urban decay in the 70s and 80s. But it engaged in a remarkable economic pivot. It transitioned from heavy metal to heavy medicine.
Wow, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Today, the largest employer in the entire state is the University of Alabama at Birmingham, or UAB. The city transformed itself into a massive hub for medical research, healthcare, and finance. It completely rewrote its economic mechanics to survive.
And yet, neither Montgomery nor Birmingham is technically the largest city proper today.
Correct. As of recent census data, the city of Huntsville in the north has surpassed them in city proper population. And Huntsville's story introduces a completely unexpected European element to the state.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you picture the Deep South economy, you picture cotton, you picture agriculture. You absolutely do not picture space travel.
And yet, Alabama's economic metamorphosis in the 20th century is one of the most dramatic leaps in modern history, and it is inextricably linked to Europe. Let's look at the mechanics of what happened in Huntsville.
Right, this is post-World War II.
Yes. At the end of World War II, the U.S. government initiated Operation Paperclip. They secretly brought over 100 elite German rocket scientists, led by Wernher von Braun, to the United States to keep them out of Soviet hands.
And eventually, the military moved them to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, to develop the U.S. space and missile program.
Think about that. You take a group of elite German scientists accustomed to European cities and drop them into the rural agricultural South in the 1950s.
The culture clash must have been staggering. How did they even communicate or integrate?
It was a massive culture shock on both sides, but it was also a catalyst for incredible transformation. Von Braun and his team didn't just build the Saturn V rocket, the actual mechanical marvel that took Apollo astronauts to the moon. They actively shaped the civic infrastructure of the city.
Wait, how so?
Von Braun insisted that for his team of European intellectuals to thrive, the city needed high culture. He argued that you couldn't beat the Soviets in the space race if your engineers were miserable. So he personally helped establish a local symphony orchestra and pushed for the creation of a world-class university presence.
A German symphony in the cotton field. It completely shatters the stereotype. I mean, a state that is so often mocked in the coastal media as backward or as flyover country, literally engineered and built the machines that allowed humans to walk on the lunar surface.
It really challenges our assumptions about regional capabilities.
Well, the European industrial influence didn't stop with rockets, did it? Because in the 1990s, the state underwent another massive mechanical shift.
It did. And this raises an important question. How does a state effectively transition a workforce from agriculture and dyeing steel into the 21st century global economy?
In Alabama's case, they bypassed traditional American industries entirely and looked directly to global manufacturing, specifically European and Asian automakers.
Yes. In 1993, Alabama made a very aggressive, highly controversial pitch to Mercedes-Benz to build its first major passenger vehicle manufacturing plant outside of Germany.
And they offered massive tax incentives to do it.
They did, but crucially, they also promised to build a highly trained workforce from scratch.
And it actually worked. Mercedes set up shop in a little town called Vance. But how do they actually pull that off? You can't just hand a cotton farmer a wrench and expect them to build a luxury German SUV.
Exactly. And that is where the mechanics of the transition are so impressive. When the Germans arrived, they didn't just bring assembly line blueprints. They brought stringent German-style apprenticeship programs and rigorous quality standards.
And the state backed them up.
Yes, the state of Alabama created a specialized, state-funded training program called AID-FLIT. They literally built training centers next to the plant to prepare the local workforce to meet exact European engineering standards before they even hit the factory floor.
That success totally opened the floodgates. Once Mercedes proved Alabama workers could build to that standard, Honda, Hyundai, and Mazda Toyota all built massive plants there. Today, the state has the capacity to build over 1 million vehicles a year.
It is one of the premier automotive export hubs in the U.S.
And we see this exact same global integration in mobile, down on the coast. Airbus, the massive European aerospace consortium, which is a joint effort of French, German, Spanish, and British aviation technology, chose Mobile as the site for its U.S. manufacturing facility.
They are assembling A320 and A220 commercial jets right there on the Gulf Coast.
Which means that European capital and European engineering standards are actively reshaping the working class of Alabama right now. If you're driving a modern Mercedes SUV in Europe today or flying on an Airbus jet within the U.S., there's a very good chance it was built by hands in Alabama.
It proves that the state's economy is highly adaptable. They recognized that the old economy was dead, and they aggressively climbed the global value chain.
Okay, so we've got rockets, we've got German cars, we've got French airplanes, but we need to talk about something else Alabama exported to the entire world, the soundtrack of the 20th century.
The cultural exports of Alabama, particularly in music, are genuinely staggering. It is difficult to overstate how much Alabama shaped American and therefore global popular music.
And again, it happens in the most unexpected places. Take Muscle Shoals. It's this tiny, unassuming town in northwest Alabama, sitting right on the Tennessee River.
Muscle Shoals is holy ground in the history of music. Starting in the late 1960s, studios, their most famously famous studios, and Muscle Shoals Sound Studio, developed a totally unique, gritty, soulful acoustic sound.
And artists from all over the world just flocked there to record. The Rolling Stones recorded Wild Horses there. Aretha Franklin recorded her breakthrough hit, I Never Loved a Man there.
And the craziest part of the Muscle Shoals story is the mechanics of the studio band itself. You had these absolute titans of black music, Aretha Franklin, Percy Sledge, Wilson Pickett coming to the Deep South in the 1960s to record.
And the house band crafting this incredibly funky, deeply soulful backing track. They were a group of local white Alabama guys who just grew up listening to black radio stations.
They were known affectionately as the Swampers. What's fascinating here is the stark, jarring contrast between the art and the physical environment outside the doors.
Because outside the studio, Alabama in the late 60s was ground zero for political segregation.
Yes. You had politicians like George Wallace literally standing in schoolhouse doors declaring segregation forever. But inside the physical acoustic space of those studios, it was entirely colorblind.
They just didn't care.
And musicians didn't care about race. They only cared about the groove. The mechanical process of making art transcended the politics of the era in a way that was almost utopian.
It's such a beautiful contradiction. And the list of individual musical legends from the state is just endless. You have Hank Williams Sr., arguably the founding father of modern country music, born in Greenville.
He practically invented the archetype of the heartbroken, solitary country singer.
You have W.C. Handy, known as the father of the blues, from Florence, Alabama. He was the first to formalize, transcribe, and publish blues compositions. He laid the musical groundwork for jazz, R&B, and rock and roll.
You have Nat King Cole, born in Montgomery, whose voice defined 20th century jazz and pop. And then you have Lionel Richie from Tuskegee, who became an absolute global pop phenomenon in the 80s.
So you might be thinking to yourself, I don't know anything about Alabama. But you need to realize that the soundtrack of your life has Alabama DNA. Whether it's Sweet Home Alabama or Lionel Richie singing Hello, or even the theme song to the TV show Friends.
Because Courtney Cox, who played Monica, is from Birmingham.
Exactly. The cultural footprint extends well into Hollywood and literature, too. There's Channing Tatum from Coleman and Oscar winner Octavia Spencer from Montgomery.
And in literature, Harper Lee from Monroeville wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, which remains one of the most widely read novels on Earth, exploring the mechanics of race and justice in the 1930s South.
And Helen Keller, a global symbol of perseverance and alternative communication, was from Tuscumbia.
But let's look at sports, because this is where Alabama produced global icons that actually shifted world history, especially through a European lens. We have to talk about how athletes from this state actively confronted fascism.
Yes, this is an incredible piece of history. When we look at sports, Alabama's exports directly challenged the mechanics of European fascism in the 1930s. Take Jesse Owens. He was born in Oakville, Alabama.
In the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, he won 4 gold medals in track and field. He performed brilliantly, directly in front of Adolf Hitler, completely shattering the Nazi pseudoscientific theory of Aryan supremacy on a global broadcast.
And then there's Joe Louis.
Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, born in Lafayette, Alabama. He was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. In 1938, he fought the German boxer Max Schmeling in an incredibly politicized rematch.
Because a victory for Schmeling would have been heavily exploited by Nazi propaganda.
Exactly, and Joe Louis knocked him out in the first round.
The irony is just staggering. Think about this. Jesse Owens and Joe Louis, 2 black men, born into the racially segregated, oppressive system of the Deep South, become the ultimate triumphant symbols of American democratic strength, crushing European fascist ideology on the world stage.
It is an incredible paradox.
And then you have modern legends like Carl Lewis, Charles Barkley, Mia Hamm, and Bo Jackson, who many consider the most gifted pure athlete of his generation. But here is the bizarre structural quirk about sports in Alabama. Despite producing all these world-class athletes, they do not have a single major professional sports team. No NFL franchise, no NBA team, no Major League Baseball.
Nature abhors a vacuum. And in Alabama, that vacuum is filled entirely and overwhelmingly by college football. If we want to understand the modern emotional and social wiring of the state, we have to talk about the mechanics of this civil religion.
You're not exaggerating when you call it a civil religion. It literally dictates the calendar.
It functions exactly like a parallel political and social system. The state is passionately, almost violently, divided between 2 massive university programs: the University of Alabama Crimson Tide, located in Tuscaloosa, and the Auburn University Tigers.
Now, in Europe, sports loyalty, especially in soccer, is usually tied to your specific urban neighborhood. You support a team because you live in that exact borough.
But in Alabama, fandom is a statewide inherited identity. You are born into it, you are either crimson and white, or you are orange and blue.
And being an Alabama or Auburn fan dictates your social circles, your business networking, and your philanthropy in the state just as much as your political party does. And the annual rivalry game between them, played every November, is called the Iron Bowl.
The Iron Bowl dates back to 1893. The name itself reflects Birmingham's industrial history, where the game was traditionally played for decades because it was the only city with a stadium large enough to hold the crowds.
So what's the sociology behind this split?
It's fascinating. The University of Alabama Crimson Tide is the historically dominant program. Under head coach Nick Saban, who led them from 2007 to 2023, they won 6 national championships. It was an unparalleled dynasty.
And they kind of represent the whole state, don't they?
They do. The Crimson Tide often functions as a statewide working-class identity project. Many of its most rabid fans never attended the university. Supporting the team is a way of claiming absolute excellence for a state that often ranks low in national, economic, or educational metrics. When the Tide wins, the whole state feels validated.
And then you have the counterweight, Auburn.
Auburn University originated as an agricultural and mechanical college. Because of that, Auburn fandom traditionally has stronger roots in the rural farming communities of the state. There's a subtle anti-establishment underdog mentality to Auburn fans.
They often view the massive Tuscaloosa program as arrogant or elitist.
Right. They are the proud rural counterweight.
And the intensity of this rivalry goes beyond anything rational. We have to talk about the trees, because this perfectly illustrates the madness.
Yes. In 2010, Auburn won a thrilling, highly contested Iron Bowl. A few months later, an angry Alabama fan named Harvey Updike was arrested for literally poisoning the iconic 130-year-old oak trees at Toomer's Corner on the Auburn campus.
These were the trees Auburn fans traditionally rolled with toilet paper to celebrate victories.
He used a lethal commercial herbicide simply out of spite over a football game. The trees die, it shocked the entire state, and he went to prison for it.
It is absolute madness. It really begs the question, why do humans need these intense tribal divides, especially in a state where the people actually share so much common culture, religion, and history? Why invent these battle lines?
It is a fundamental human need for belonging and distinction. When you lack major geopolitical conflicts or deep ethnic divisions internally, societies often create symbolic warfare to channel that tribal energy.
That makes a lot of sense.
The Iron Bowl allows Alabamians to engage in fierce, passionate conflict on Saturday and then go to the exact same churches together on Sunday.
Speaking of battle lines, let's talk about the political map, because this is where European observers get completely lost. The historical mechanics of Southern politics are incredibly counterintuitive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of American history, the political evolution of the American South is arguably the most complex in the democratic world. For 100 years after the American Civil War, white Alabamians voted almost exclusively for the Democratic Party.
This phenomenon was known as the Solid South, which confuses everyone today because the South is famous globally for being deeply, reliably Republican. So why were they Democrats back then?
Because of the mechanical fallout of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, who waged the war against the South and emancipated the enslaved population, was the first Republican president. The Union Army that burned Southern infrastructure was seen as a Republican army.
So for a century, the white Southern elite viewed the Democratic Party not as a liberal or progressive party, but as the party of Southern preservation.
Exactly. States' rights and resistance to Northern Republican interference. They were staunchly conservative Democrats.
Okay, so what caused the massive flip? How did the map turn red?
The civil rights movement of the 1960s was the catalyst, but the mechanics took decades. When the National Democratic Party, led by figures like President Lyndon B. Johnson, fully embraced the civil rights movement and passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the old regional alliance shattered.
And the Republican Party saw an opening.
They did. Beginning with Richard Nixon, they employed what political scientists call the Southern strategy. They realized that they could pick up alienated white Southern voters by appealing to cultural conservatism, law and order, and advocating for localized states' rights over federal mandates.
But it wasn't an overnight flip, right? It wasn't like everyone just woke up one Tuesday and changed their voter registration.
No, exactly. It started at the top with presidential elections, but it took decades for local county commissioners, sheriffs, and school boards to switch parties. It was a slow, generational realignment of the political infrastructure.
And today, Alabama is one of the most reliably, deeply Republican states in the country. Governor Kay Ivey and the Republican supermajorities in the state legislature dominate the political landscape.
And again, we must stress that we are looking at this purely as political scientists tracking demographic shifts, not judging the validity of either party's modern platform.
Of course, the data is just stark. Demographically, the state is about 69% white and 27% black. Today, black voters overwhelmingly support the Democratic Party, while white voters overwhelmingly support the Republican Party.
The divide is heavily racial and geographical, tracing right back to that black belt soil we talked about at the very beginning. Geology literally drew the voting map.
And religion plays a massive structural part in this modern political alignment as well, doesn't it?
Huge. Over 80% of the state identifies as Christian, with the Baptist denomination being heavily dominant. Alabama sits squarely in the Bible Belt.
In much of Europe, religion has retreated entirely to the private sphere.
But in Alabama, evangelical Christianity is public, social infrastructure. It organizes charity, social life, and, crucially, political mobilization. For many voters, biblical values are an openly declared primary motivation for how they cast their ballots on issues like education.
So the European secular left versus right binary completely fails to explain Alabama politics. You have to view it through the lens of faith as a civic organizing principle.
It's a completely different operational framework.
Now, before we wrap up, we have to talk about Alabama's neighborhood. Because states, just like countries, have complex relationships with their borders. And the dynamic between the southern states is incredibly relatable if you're listening from Europe.
It is a classic sibling rivalry. They share a massive overarching regional identity. They are all fiercely proud of being from the South. They share the food, the religion, the history. But internally, they bicker endlessly about who is doing it best.
Let's run through the siblings. First, Georgia, right next door to the east.
Georgia is the successful older sibling. With Atlanta acting as a massive, booming international hub for finance, film, and aviation, Georgia acts as an economic magnet.
So Alabama often watches its brightest young talent cross the border to Atlanta for corporate jobs.
It's a rivalry fueled by a very real economic envy.
Then you have Mississippi to the west.
Mississippi is the poorer sibling.
Yeah.
Alabama often struggles in national rankings for education or healthcare, but there is an old, somewhat dark regional joke. Thank God for Mississippi.
Because Mississippi often ranks just a bit lower, keeping Alabama from the absolute bottom.
It's a relationship of solidarity, but also a desperate desire not to be associated with the worst metrics.
That to the north, you have Tennessee.
The friendly musical sibling. Tennessee has Nashville, the global country music capital, but as we discussed, Alabama has Muscle Shoals and Hank Williams.
They share the Appalachian foothills and the Tennessee River.
It's a rivalry of pride, arguing over who is the true, authentic guardian of Southern musical heritage.
And finally, Florida to the south.
Florida is the rich neighbor with the incredibly lavish beach house. Alabama actually has a stunning, beautiful white sand coastline on the Gulf of Mexico, but it's very short. Florida has the massive peninsula, the international tourists, the theme parks.
So Alabama residents flock to Florida for vacations, fully aware that their neighbor hit the geographic jackpot for tourism.
But the beauty of this sibling rivalry is exactly what you see in Europe. Think of the Scandinavian countries. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark will mock each other relentlessly over language or culture.
But the second someone from outside the region insults them, they lock shields.
The southern states are exactly the same. They will fight each other over college football or barbecue styles, but the second a politician from New York or a journalist from California insults the Deep South, they unite instantly. They are fiercely protective of their shared identity.
It's a defense mechanism forged by a shared history of feeling misunderstood or looked down upon by the rest of the country. And it creates a regional bond that is stronger than any internal border dispute.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. We've talked about all these massive historical shifts, from cotton to rockets, from the Confederacy to civil rights, from Democrats to Republicans.
Alabama is a state defined by painful, incredible evolution. And there is one physical monument in the state that I think perfectly encapsulates the mechanics of this spirit.
You're talking about the monument in Enterprise.
Yes. In the town of Enterprise, Alabama, there is a monument that is completely unique in the world. It is a towering classical statue dedicated to an agricultural pest, the boll weevil.
In the early 1900s, this little insect invaded Alabama and completely devastated the cotton crops. It was an economic apocalypse for the region.
The mechanism of their entire livelihood was eaten alive. The farmers were ruined.
But the ruin forced their hand. They could no longer rely on the inertia of the past.
Exactly. Instead of just giving up and starving, they were forced to diversify. Thanks to the agricultural research of a brilliant black scientist named George Washington Carver over at the Tuskegee Institute, they learned how to plant peanuts.
And it turned out the mechanics of planting peanuts restored nitrogen to the soil, and they were vastly more profitable than cotton ever was.
The farmers became incredibly wealthy from this forced change. They were so grateful for the disaster that they literally built a monument to the pest that ruined their old way of life.
It is such a profound story.
So I want to leave you with this thought to mull over today. How often do the disasters that completely destroy our current comfortable way of life end up being the exact painful catalysts we need to evolve into something better? Alabama's entire history, all its deep scars and all its towering rockets, is a testament to that question.
A profound point to end on. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the complex mechanics of the American South.
We hope you come back for a new deep dive tomorrow evening. We'll set our course back across the Atlantic to the Pyrenees and a country you might not have even heard of as an American, Andorra. Even many Europeans would struggle to place this micronation on a map, but they have an incredible history you won't want to miss. It is exactly these hidden gems we want to bring to light in this show. Have a great evening.